Okay, what we are going to do is work on a Mobx observable site. Just work to show how state management works. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and start. Say create React app Mobx. Alright, so the way this is going to work is we have data coming in through a driver, essentially, which is the adapter or the interface that talks to the database, which is just really an API with dummy data. And we have three parts of our app: the data model, which is how we model the data. We have the view model, which is to transform that for the output, and then we have the components, which is where we display everything. Okay, so we inject the dependency of the data dependency in the in the class when we create it. So dependency injection, and what is going on here will be observable. Something that it's the pubsub pattern, so something that will be public. This will be the data model will be the publisher. The view model will subscribe to the data model, and then the components will subscribe to the view model. Okay, so that way you could swap out React for Angular or Vue or whatever or anything else and still keep all of this the same. So drop in, replace web framework, and you can drop in, replace the database, the data source too. You just use the same interface, or you can adjust the interface, but this data model is going to talk to this interface in the same way. That's not going to change. You can just change how you access this data, and then give the data model what it's expecting. So that way the dependency goes inward and not outward. So the data model is not dependent on the database. Instead, the database is dependent on the data model. So the arrow flowing inward points, this is which way the dependency goes. Dependency go inward. Okay. We have our app. We're just going to create a new folder. Let's call it shared. And we'll create 3 files in here. One will be the gateway. We'll call it HTTP gateway. Or we could just call it gateway. Okay, so that's the driver. That's the API gateway, essentially, to get the data. But it'll have data loaded in it already. Another file is called the repository. Okay, so that's this data model. And then you have one more file called presenter, which is the view model, which is going to transform this data. Okay, and then the components, the web framework, is this app.js. Okay, so the gateway is where we start, and we'll just say export default class gateway get equals async, and we'll resolve we'll return a promise dot resolve, and it'll just be first name John, last name Doe. Okay, so when we call this, yeah, it's async method. All right, so that's the gateway. Next is the repository. Oh, we have to actually, Yeah, export default. Okay, fine. Okay, next is the repository. Let me actually add Mobx here, so we have that. We'll import. We're going to say make observable in action from Mobx. Import the gateway from gateway, and we'll say export default class. Class repository, and we're going to call this programmer's model, okay, and that's just the data model, really, okay, and we'll say in the constructor it'll be a no-arg constructor, and we'll say this dot programmer's model equals, and what we're going to do is do a first and last name. Okay. Programmer's model. Okay. And this dot gateway. Yeah. This dot gateway equals new gateway. And then we're going to make observable. We're going to make the data model here observable. Okay, we could call this data model. It would be fine, but I'm just going to leave it as programmer's model because that's the way I've been learning it. We'll say update programmer's model as an action, and a load as an action. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and say load async function, and we're going to say data transfer object equals wait, this dot gateway dot get. Okay, so if we call this gateway dot get, it's this method right here. Okay, so now our data transfer object, we're going to use what we get back from that when we load it to load this up, this programmer's model. Okay, so we're going to say this dot programmer's model is equals to f name is DTO to first name, L name DTO dot last name. Okay, so in the get we have this first name and last name, so we want to convert, we want to model the data coming from the database as something a little bit different. Okay, we're doing a little bit of a transformation in here by modeling it as f name instead of first name from the get method. Okay, all right, so it's a little bit of, this is a little bit of a extract. This isn't a straight extract. This is a transform. Well, this is a transformation, and it is also a load too. So it's like ETL happening right here. All right. So that's for load, and this will happen one time initially when you start the app, and then we'll update. Yeah, we'll have an update programmer's model, which will say, we'll say this dot programmer's model equals f name, L name, but this f name and L name is going to come in here too. Okay. So what's going to happen is the component is going to submit a form, which is going to pass through to the view model, which will basically transform it from an object, because it'll come in the form, in a form it'll be an object that gets sent, and the view model will transform it from an object into two parameters, two arguments, and hit the data model with it. And when the data model updates, the view model will update, and then when the view model updates, the components will update. Okay, so fname lname, this programmer's model is fname lname. All right, so we make this whole class, this repository class, an observable by setting this actual model as the state that's being updated, which will be observed by these methods, and these are the actions that will update this state. Okay, so we've got those all set. Now we go into the presenter, and we want to import make observable observable action from Mobx, import repository. Actually, we're going to export this repository, but we want to do it, oh, excuse me, export default class repository. Okay, it's already exported. Okay, so we can just import it from here. All right, so import repository from repository. So presenter is in the same folder here. All right, so we've got Mobx in the repository, and then we'll say we're going to need more than just make observable. We're going to need auto run too. Auto run, make observable action. Okay. So this is going to be, this presenter is going to, this view model is a presenter. I should have changed this to data model transform into presenter, but that's okay. This is this presenter is the first thing that's going to be subscribing. So the gateway is nothing subscribing. Data model is not subscribing to it. It's just getting loaded. And this has an observable, but it's not subscribing to anything. This one is an observable because its state will change based on this, but it's also subscribing to this. So now we need auto run. Auto run is basically like how you subscribe. And there are other ways if you want to couple your components directly rather than doing it this way. You don't have to use auto run, but I don't want to couple my components to the data, so I'm using auto run. All right, so we're doing it this way, and we'll say, okay, class presenter view model. Okay, we'll say constructor, and it's a no arg constructor. First, we're going to say this dot, it doesn't matter, repository equals new repository, this dot view model. And we'll go ahead and kind of instantiate this, set it to null. We want not just fname lname, but we also want a formatted string to be null. Okay, we'll use that as well. So we're doing a little bit of transformation based on this data model, which has done a little bit of transformation. And the data model is basically the ETL, the base layer of ETL, and the view model is sort of like an aggregate. It's an aggregate layer on top of that base layer. Okay, so that's what we're doing. All right, so view models, we have formatted string, and now we want to just go ahead and call make observable this. And we'll say the view model is the observable, and we have two more methods to load. We have a load, which is an action. We have a submit, which is an action. All right. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say load is an async method, and what we're going to do here is what we're going to do is we're going to call auto run here. Auto run. And now what auto run does is it takes a function which which subscribes to whatever is in here. So we'll say this dot view model equals, and we're going to say, yeah, it already knows. Okay, so this dot view model. Okay, so you have here this dot. Here's the view model and the presenter. So it's this this aggregate layer. Okay, this is the data model's aggregate layer, the view model. So we're basically flattening it. But okay, so what we're doing is we have this null, instantiated flattened layer, formatted string, fname, lname. We're going to say now this dot view model, same as here, equals. We're going to do the same, formatted string, but instead of null. Well, why does it say null? Null. Okay, string. Okay, instead of saying null, we're going to say formatted string is, and we'll go ahead and just, I don't feel like, okay, but it's okay. I'll type it out. Okay, we'll grave quote. We'll say hello, your name is, and we'll just interpolate some values here. Now what we want here in the auto run, what we want is the data that is in the repository. So the data model repository, it has value objects. It doesn't have entities. Entity would be like a database row with an ID, which you uniquely identify it, and it can change or whatever, slowly change in dimension or whatever, something like that. It's not an entity. It's a value object. Okay, so the value object that we are going to manipulate and use here is going to be located in the repository. Let's see, this dot repository. Does it tell me here? I need to use TypeScript. It's going to be the repository's own programmer's model, okay, which has fname and lname, right? So programmer's model is fname, the DTO's first name, and the DTO's last name. But anyway, it's going to have the programmer's model. The repository's data model is an object with two properties: one fname, the other lname. Okay, so programmer's model dot fname, programmer's model dot lname, and the way we access that in the presenter is by saying, since we instantiated the repository, a new repository, okay, that's this. Okay, we export default class repository, so we go ahead and instantiate that. We instantiate that object from the class, so we have the repository object is of class repository. Okay, so this dot repository, the observable, the data model that's being observed and that we're manipulating here, subscribing to, is the repository dot programmer's model dot first and last name property. So it's the programmer's model object with first and last name. Okay, so this dot repository dot programmer's model. Okay, so this dot repository dot programmer's model dot fname. Okay, this dot repository programmer's model dot lname. Okay, so that's the formatted string, and then yeah, we could just copy that. So the fname is this dot repository to programmer's model dot fname, and then lname would be this repository programmer's model lname. Okay, so when load gets run, or when load is called, this will automatically start tracking the programmer's model and its values, okay, and it'll set the local view model equal to an object comprising these various properties, okay. Whatever I called it before, I forgot what yeah, okay. Okay, so that's what autorun does. Autorun subscribes to the repository's observable, and inside of this function you can do whatever you want with it. So we're setting this view model equal to the values of the repository that it's subscribing to with autorun. All right, so that's the load method. And inside of load, we actually have to call await this dot repository dot load. Okay, and what that will do is it will grab that data from the driver, from the API gateway, okay, and load up its own programmer's model. Okay, and so it loads up its own programmer's model when you call load. So now the repository has a f name and l name on its programmer's model, data model, and then this auto run will observe that it has been loaded up, and now the view model will be loaded up based on the data model. Okay, so now once you call load, now you have the view model loaded up as an object, formatted string f name l name. Okay, so we'll call load. Now the last one will be submit. Yeah, and we're going to take actually a view model. Okay, so we're in the presenter, the view model. When we submit data in a form, first name, last name, it'll come in as an object to the view model. So that will come in here. It'll have f name, l name. And then what we'll do to that is we'll call the repository update programmer's model with view model.fname, view model.lname. So we'll separate them. We'll separate the object into those two properties, first and last name, separated with a comma because there's two arguments. So when we go to update our programmer's model, it's expecting first and last name, so it can update its own model with the first and last name. Okay. So programmer's models, the value object would be right there. Okay. Yeah, so submit view model, this repository update programmer's model, first name, view model f name, view model l name. Right. Okay. So it's coming in. We're calling the argument a view model because the web component, the volatile state maintained by the components of whatever's in the form, we're going to call that view model for the React dot whatever it's called, set state, whatever. The volatile state, we're just going to call a view model. So it's kind of shadow variables here. We're have multiple names, different scopes, but either way, you get the picture. It should be fine. Exports. We're going to export this thing as a singleton. So we're going to create one instance of it and export that instance. So whoever uses it, they are using the same instance. So we're not constructing multiple presenters or whatever like that. And then when we get into the app, the app is the only thing that's going to have the component, the component outer layer, the UI layer is the only thing that's going to have access to the view model. The view model is the only one that's going to have access to the data model, the repository. So there's no you're not crossing any boundaries here. And of course, the data model is the only one who has access to the API gateway. So we're not calling data straight into the components or anything like that. We're just going through here, then there, then there. So we're making the view model is going to be a singleton. So there's only one instance of it, and that way when you're making updates, it's not like making an update somewhere and then getting lost in translation because there's a different instance of it that's trying to get an update, and you can't get synced that way. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to import React from React. I'm going to import auto run from Mobx, and I'm going to import presenter from this one is going to be shared presenter. Okay, and then let's clear all this out. Okay. All right. So what I want to do here is to say const view model set view model equals react.use state empty object. We're going to say react.use effect. Yeah, there. So it'll run one time, and we're going to go ahead and say we got the presenter here. We're going to create, and I don't think we actually need to do this because we're in React 18, but we're going to do the more classical style anyway. We're going to just create a. It's not. I think we could just do top level of await here, but because it's React 18, but I'm just going to do classical style here. So we'll say. Let me look at my notes here. Okay, so we're going to say async function, or const load equals async. And then we'll end up saying load. That, and in here we're going to call auto run. Okay, auto run. Sorry. Okay, we're going to call auto run, and the way auto run works is it takes a function and automatically tracks observables and allows you to call a function with those observables. Okay, so we're going to set the view model based on the presenter's view model data. Okay, view model is of course formatted string fname lname, so it'll be presenter.viewModel.formatted. Okay, so we're going to say in the auto run we're going to say set view model, and we're going to have you know what, we don't even need to do object here. We could just say present view model presenter dot view model. Okay, because we're in the component layer here, so we don't need to do any transformation whatsoever. It's already ready to go based on the view model, so we have everything loaded up there. Okay, all right. So that's the auto run. The auto run will the view model of the presenter. The view model here is the observable. Okay, so that's when we import it in here and call auto run around it, we wrap it in auto run, like this higher order component here. It recognizes presenter.viewModel as an observable. When this changes, it will set, you know, our component state with that data. And in order for that to change or to get reflected, we have to call the presenter's load method. So we'll say await presenter.load. And when the presenter gets their load method called, it's calling repository load. Repository load is, of course, grabbing, it's going out to through the API gateway, the database driver. It's grabbing that data and loading it up. So injecting its dependency, the data dependency is getting injected here through the load method, and it loads its programmer's model, okay, which is observable. And the presenters wrap that in an auto run, so it recognizes that programmer's model, which is an observable. It recognizes that, and it sets its own view model. Its transformation layer, its aggregate layer, essentially. It creates its aggregate layer based on that observable state. Okay, so it loaded. So it forced the repository to load its data. The repository's data is observable. It observed that observable, and based on that observable update, which it forced, it will update its own state. Now, its own state is the view model, which the app has wrapped in an observable, auto run here, and it set its own volatile state, the UI component state, with the data from the presenter state, because initially the component made the presenter load its data, and when the presenter loaded its data, it made the repository load its data, and the repository loaded its data, it injected, it got its, dependency is already injected in the constructor, but that is the driver, right? The gateway is its driver, its interface for getting that data. Anyways, it called the database, which was essentially, you know, in our case, just a promise resolved with dummy data. Okay, so those are the steps. Call presenter.load, set the view model. Okay, and now let's just JSON stringify that view model and see what we got. So yarn start. Okay. Formatted string, your name is John Doe, F name John, last name Doe. All right, so we can go ahead and, I guess we can just do that. Let's go ahead and create some logic here. Okay, so we'll just do a P, and we'll say, what do we want? We want the view model. So what we have in the view model is, well, you know, we can keep that there. We can just keep that there so we know what's in there. View model, we have the formatted string. Okay, so let's do a P. We'll say, actually, we'll just make this an H. We'll make this an H2. And I'm not styling anything, so H2 and P is going to be the same. But view model dot formatted string. Okay. All right, and then let's see, below that we'll make a form. There won't be any action. but we'll style it real quick. Style equals display flex. Okay, and inside the form, we'll do a couple of inputs. We'll do an input. We'll say value equals view model. All right, my friend's doing his podcast here. Gotta make this quick. All right, view model dot fname on change equals take the event, fire that, set the view model to whatever it currently is, but just change the fname to e.target.value. Okay, and then go ahead and just pull that down there. Lname, and a button. Submit. We'll say on click. On click event. Say e.prevent default, e.prevent default, and so what we want to do is call submit on the presenter. All right, so the presenter has a submit taking the view model to update the okay, so we'll call we have presenter, just it's not this or anything because these are components, functional components, so it's not a class, so you just call presenter. It's already instantiated, so we'll just say presenter dot submit view model. Okay, and that should work. So let's see what we got. Gian. All right, Gianni. Now, one thing I want to show you is when I turn this off, you can see that the WebSocket connection is no longer there, but I can still update this though. Dosif. So it's still reactive, even though the server's off. Okay, hope you enjoyed that.